After leaving the psychiatric hospital, I buried my sister in the ground. When my stepsister poured soy sauce on my mother's memorial photo, I poured chicken droppings into her food and forced her to eat it all by pushing her head down. My stepmother and father sent me to a mental hospital, and I happily packed my bags and moved in. Half a year later, as soon as I got out, I buried my stepsister in the soil and poured 2 loads of manure over her head. I clapped and laughed loudly. You reap what you sow. Dad, if you plant your wife in there, you might grow a dozen new wives. My stepsister cried to Dad, Daddy, this bastard has gone crazy again. I sneered inwardly. She's the real bastard, born from my stepmother and her lover. Trying to take away my 100 billion inheritance? No way. After all, I'm a lunatic who can go crazy at any time. When Dad came to pick me up with my stepmother, I was standing there with a blank stare and a long string of drool hanging from my mouth. My stepmother asked the doctor, Is my son really all right now? The doctor wrung his hands, his eyes flickering nervously, but finally gave a slight nod and said, He's basically recovered. Although mentally, he might still be somewhat different from normal people, but he can generally follow rules and instructions. The doctor's words put my stepmother's mind at ease, and she smiled at him, saying, Don't worry, the Chin family sponsorship will be transferred to your hospital's account soon. The doctor wiped his sweat and thanked her nervously, about to go process the discharge papers. I sucked the drool back into my mouth, my gaze becoming clear, and said to the doctor, Don't forget what I asked for, otherwise, I can still stay here for another 10 to 15 days. The doctor stopped in his tracks, his whole body trembling slightly. Under the watchful eyes of my father, stepmother, and sister, he fled from the hospital room. Soon after, the nurse brought me a certificate of mental illness. This was my get-out-of-jail-free card, and also the condition for my agreement to leave. At this moment, my sister ran over, patted my head, and said to me in front of our father with an innocent look, Brother, you hit me, but I don't blame you. After all, we're family. Dad only sent you to the mental hospital. We should love each other. Don't you agree? My stepmother, holding onto my father's arm, said to him with apparent emotion, Look how understanding our Ting Ting is. Even after going to the mental hospital, she still defends her brother like this. Father nodded with satisfaction. How wonderful it would be if our family could always get along like this in the future. At this point, Ting Ting brought her head close to my ear and whispered, You bastard, if you don't behave yourself in the future, I'll tell Dad to send you back to the mental hospital again. You hear me? I carefully tucked away my psychiatric certificate, not feeling angry at all by what Ting Ting had said. Instead, I looked at her with a kind expression and said, Don't worry, your brother will treat you well from now on. Even better than before. During my time in the psychiatric hospital, almost nothing had changed at home, except for my bedroom. My sister watched me standing at the doorway and asked, Brother, why aren't you coming in? Taking advantage of the time before Dad arrived, my sister began introducing my room to me. Oh, right, brother, I almost forgot to tell you. During the time you were in the mental hospital, since your room was empty anyway, I let your dog stay there. My dog is a poodle, gentle in nature, usually very attached to me and always obedient to my commands. But now, it had become terribly thin, with messy, unkempt fur. The leash around its neck was so tight it could barely breathe, keeping it firmly tethered to my bedpost, leaving it unable to move. Dog feces and urine were all over the floor. The quilts were torn to shreds. All my hard-collected graphics cards, figurines, and sneakers. Everything was scattered everywhere, leaving barely any space to step. This clearly couldn't have been done by my dog. My sister walked in, grabbed the photo frame from my bedside table, smashed it violently on the floor, made a face at me, and said with a laugh, Nya nya nya, I dare you to hit me. You coward, just wait until Dad sends you to a mental hospital. Idiot. As Dad and stepmom approached, my sister suddenly turned pitiful, wiping her tears as she said, Wah wah wah, Dad, Mom, I accidentally broke Big Brother's photo frame. Big Brother won't get angry and hit me, will he? Dad, I'm so scared. She then nestled into Dad's arms. Don't be afraid, Ting Ting, Dad's here. Dad comforted me. Her acting skills were absolutely incredible. At such a young age, she already had half her mother's talent. When she grows up, won't she become an Oscar-winning drama queen? My stepmother comforted me while staring intently at my expression, saying, Xiao Gang, I'm sorry, but your sister kept your dog in your room. You don't mind, do you? Seeing that I had just been discharged from the hospital, Dad carefully praised me, saying, Xiao Gang, your little sister is still young and doesn't understand many things. As her older brother, You need to be more understanding and tolerant with her. We have plenty of rooms in the house anyway. I'll have the housekeeper prepare another room for you later. How does that sound? I didn't mind the mess in the room at all, and walked without hesitation to my dog's side. The dog nuzzled against my body, licked my hand, and whimpered softly. I raised my hand, making a celebratory gesture, and shouted, "This room is absolutely amazing. It's literally my dream room." As I spoke under bewildered gazes. Moving the dog bed to the side, untying the dog's leash, holding the dog in my arms, pulling back the covers, and about to lie down. When they saw me, they shamelessly crawled into the dog bed. The stepmother quickly covered her mouth, half pretending and half genuinely shocked by my action. Father's eyelid twitched. This room was so filthy, it was barely habitable. Letting his own son live in a doghouse, this scene made him feel a bit heartbroken. "Dad, my brother is actually going to sleep in the doghouse." The sister tugged at her father's shirt. "Is he having another mental episode? That's disgusting." For the first time in her life, her father gave her no response at all. The veins on the back of father's hand were throbbing, but he kept his patience and spoke to me in a gentle voice. "Xiao Gang, come down from there. Go take a proper bath. How can a person sleep in a dog kennel? I'll have the housekeeper bring you some fresh clothes later." Dad wanted to come forward and lift me out of the dog kennel. I turned my head, stuck out my bottom, and with an adorably silly expression, asked Dad in feigned surprise, "What did you say? People aren't supposed to sleep with dogs." "Dad, don't tell me you never slept together with dogs when you were little?" "My stepmother made me sleep with the dog every day. Sleeping with the dog was so comfortable. Why don't you try it too?" As I spoke, I tried to pull my father to crawl into the doghouse with me. Seeing that my father refused, I went to grab my sister instead. My sister screamed, but it was no use. My father was completely stunned. "Xiao Gang, let go of your sister first. And you're saying that when you were little, you slept in a doghouse with dogs every day? When did this happen? How come I didn't know about this?" He stared at my stepmother in a daze. My sister explained, "Woo-woo. Dad, don't mind him. Don't listen to his nonsense. He must be having another mental breakdown. She even wanted me to sleep in a dog kennel. Quick, send him to a mental hospital." With a combined effort of my stepmother and father, my sister finally escaped from my dog's kennel. She patted her princess dress that had gotten dog poop on it from lying on the ground, looking utterly wronged. The stepmother quickly tapped my sister's head, telling her to shut up. Obviously, when it comes to acting skills, the younger one still had much to learn from the elder. The stepmother patiently explained, "That's right, as you know, from childhood until now, Xiao Gang has always been closest to this family dog. Sometimes when they got tired from playing, Xiao Gang would voluntarily sleep in the dog's kennel. No matter how much I tried to pick him up or call him, he insisted on sleeping together with the dog. You know Xiao Gang's personality. There was nothing I could do to stop him." Her performance was so vivid and emotional, as if it had really happened. I said, "Huh? That's not what you said before. You said anyone associated with my birth mother should be treated like a dog, only fit to sleep in a kennel? And you also said that someone like me only deserves to eat dog food. Dad, since you've never slept in a doghouse, you must have at least eaten dog food, right? Don't tell me you've never tried it. Don't make me look down on you." I delivered the killer blow. My stepmom's face changed several times before she forced a calm smile and said, "Xiao Gang, you've got it all wrong. Actually, you were the one who asked me what dog food tasted like. I told you it couldn't taste good, but you wouldn't believe me and insisted on trying it. I couldn't even stop you. That's how it happened, isn't it?" Dad gritted his teeth, his face turning red. His own son, not only sleeping in a dog kennel but eating dog food too? He clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. On one side was his son, who had just been released from the mental hospital. On the other side was his wife, who had stayed by his side all these years. At this moment, he was at a loss about whose words he should heed. I chose to add another log to the fire, patted my nearly empty stomach, and said, "Dad, I'm hungry again. I want to eat dog food. Please ask the nanny to prepare some dog food for me." I looked at the dog bowl again, at the few pieces of dog food remaining, and my eyes revealed a greedy desire. At this very moment, when Dad saw my expression, his gaze toward my stepmother became somewhat suspicious. I knew I had achieved my goal. Dad had already started to distrust my stepmother. After much persuasion, Dad convinced me that it was too late to eat dog food as it would be hard to digest, so I finally settled down after the nanny made me a bowl of porridge. I quietly poured that bowl of porridge to feed the dog. After Dad and my little sister left, I saw my stepmother and the maid whispering about me. My stepmother looked at me with malicious eyes. She told the nanny that if the matter was handled well, she would give her some money as a reward. Greed flickered in the nanny's eyes. This wasn't the first time the stepmother had given money to the nanny. The nanny tidied up a room for me to live in. After she closed the door, she forced me to take the psychiatric medication prescribed by the hospital along with a glass of milk. I looked at the medication in her hand, which was several times stronger than what the hospital prescribed. She wanted to drug me with a large dose of psychiatric medication. This kind of medicine is very damaging to the brain. This must have been her stepmother's doing, making her do this. At first, I refused to eat. She threatened me, saying, "You mentally ill person, if you don't eat, I'll stick cane needles in you like I did when you were little. I'll make you wish you were dead." As she spoke, she actually pulled out 2 embroidery needles from her shirt pocket, holding them between her fingers. She stared at me with excited and crazed eyes. I pretended to be scared, turned around, pulled down my pants, exposed my buttocks, and said to her, "Go ahead and stick me then." The nanny was completely stunned. Her hand holding the needle was trembling slightly. "Are you really mentally ill?" But suddenly, she made some kind of determination. Her eyes flashed coldly, and with the needle raised high above her head, she said viciously, "I'll teach you to pretend." I knew the room had very good soundproofing. She wasn't worried at all that if she stuck me with a needle now, my screams wouldn't attract anyone's attention. Of course, I wasn't that stupid. I may have a mental illness certificate, but I'm not an idiot. There's no way I'd just stick my butt out for her to jab. My digestive system isn't very good. And that old woman in front of me was about to face the consequences.
Ouch.
"You little brat. Why is your fart so stinky? Wait, what did you spray on my face?" She touched her cheek and couldn't help but gag. "You little brat. How dare you defecate on my face? I'll kill you." Seeing this old woman nearly going insane, I quickly calmed myself down. I snatched the psychiatric medication from her hand. While she was screaming, I grabbed all those pills and shoved them into her throat, covering her mouth to force her to swallow them. You little bastard. What did you make me take?" I knew very well about the effects of these pills, and they work quite fast. In front of me, the nanny held her head, starting to sway back and forth like someone who had too much to drink. Just like when I first took these pills. Back then, I was in the psychiatric hospital, where doctors and nurses forced me to take them. I refused to take them, so I used a little trick to deceive them and secretly hid the pills. I ground the hidden pills into powder and poured it into the doctors' and nurses' thermos cups, making them take it without knowing. Soon, the elderly nanny collapsed in front of me, her limbs weak but consciousness clear. I pulled out a movable restraint chair from under the bed and tied her to it, and put my beloved Hannibal mask on her. My eyes sparkled with excitement as I hurriedly explained to her. "This is called a restraint chair. You've never seen one before, right? Oh, right. You've never been to a psychiatric hospital, so you couldn't know about it. This is quite a useful thing." I patted the brand new restraint chair. "To make it easier to treat theatrical drama queens with mental issues like you, with this, whether it's electroshock therapy, injections, or medication, everything will be much more convenient."
뭔데?
Our Hannibal's mask. The nanny's eyes were bloodshot. The nanny screamed at the top of her lungs. "You little brat, what are you trying to do? If you kill me, you'll be caught by the police and go to jail." I looked at her as if I was looking at a fool, stroking her forehead while pulling out a certificate from my pocket to show her. "You idiot, I have a certificate. Don't you know mentally ill people aren't legally responsible for murder?" Of course, I didn't want to kill her yet. I was just trying to scare her. Just from this level of intimidation, the old woman was already trembling all over, losing control of her bodily functions. Fed up with her voice, I took the dirty rag covered in dog waste that my sister had thrown into my room and used it to gag her mouth. The nanny retched and had a fit of violent coughing. I put on disposable gloves pretentiously, secretly sighing that without a doctor's white coat, I couldn't do any cosplay. I said to the nanny, "Have you heard of ice pick therapy? It was a common treatment for mental illness in the last century. I think it would work just as well for drama queens. In a moment, I'll use this all, inserting it from the corner of your eye straight into your brain. The process might hurt a bit, but please trust me, your mental illness will be cured soon." As I spoke, I held the sharp awl near her eyeball, searching for the right spot to strike. But before I could strike, this old woman, the nanny, simply closed her eyes and let out a breath. Had she really fainted just from fright? I threw the hammer and disposable gloves on the ground, sneering as I said, "No fun at all." Then, taking advantage of the night, while all lights in the villa were off, I moved the restraint chair with the nanny still lying on it to the basement, where people rarely went. I secretly hid away some valuable items from the house, including jewelry. Then I threw all the nanny's clothes and luggage from her room into the basement as well, creating the illusion that the nanny had run away from home. In the morning, Dad thought we'd been robbed and wanted to call the police. My stepmother looked at me with a strange gaze, wanting to say something but lacking evidence. She ultimately remained silent. "Let's eat first." Dad called the family to sit down in the dining room. My sister piled a bunch of vegetables into my bowl. Gently, with a pretentious manner, she said, "Brother has been locked up in the mental hospital these days and has gotten so thin from hunger. You need to eat more." The stepmother praised the younger sister in front of father, saying, "See how caring Tingting is towards her brother. Xiao Gang is truly blessed to have such a sister. It must be good fortune from 3 lifetimes." Father nodded with a smile. This is exactly how a family should be. Only I knew that the kindness from the stepmother and Li Til's sister was all just an act. My sister put all the food I used to hate the most into my bowl. And I'm actually allergic to several of these dishes. My stepmother watched me with an ambiguous smile. From her expression, she must have thought I would push aside the food my sister had picked for me in disgust, so she urged me. "Xiao Gang, eat up. Your sister specially picked this for you. Don't let your sister's thoughtfulness go to waste." Dad also asked me, "Yes, Xiao Gang, eat while it's hot. It won't taste as good when it gets cold." The next second, without hesitation, I scooped up the food from the plate and started eating heartily. Seeing me eating with such relish, my little sister and stepmother exchanged glances, both stunned. Compared to the food at the mental hospital, the food at home was absolutely heavenly. While eating, I deliberately nauseated them by saying, "This is so delicious. I've never eaten anything this good in my entire life. Except for the dog food my stepmother fed me, this is the second best thing I've ever eaten. Also, this is my first time eating at the table, and it feels amazing to be able to sit in a chair while eating." As I spoke, I even put my feet up on the table. My feet hadn't been washed since I came in yesterday. My sister couldn't help wanting to pinch her nose. Her expression showed she genuinely found it smelly. But in front of our father, she didn't dare show any expression of disgust towards me. Dad glanced sideways at his stepmother, frowning as he said, "Why haven't you ever told me about this before? Xiao Gang was never allowed to eat at the table at home. Dad used to have a lot of social engagements and rarely ate at home." The stepmother interrupted Dad's words without showing any signs of acting. How could that be possible? Xiao Gang was just joking. How could I possibly not let him sit at the table for meals? I scratched my head and said, "Huh? Why don't I remember ever eating at the dining table before?" In the past, stepmother always threw my mother's portrait into the doghouse and made me stay there, saying, "From now on, when it's mealtime, you and your mother are only allowed to stay here." The stepmother's eyelids twitched involuntarily as she forced herself to say, "Xiao Gang, you just got out of the mental hospital, and you've been taking the medication they prescribed. The doctor said that kind of medicine can cause confusion in the short term. You must have remembered it wrong. Your stepmother would never treat you like that." I scratched my head and said, "Did I remember it wrong?" My sister chimed in, "Brother, you must have remembered wrong. Mom and I love you so much. I even specially picked out food for you just now, don't you remember?" I nodded and said, "Yes, my sister did specially pick out food for me just now. My sister loves me." Mother and daughter thought they could get away with it just like that. My sister took a spoonful of meat porridge, but as she ate it, there was something unexpectedly crunchy that felt like it was getting stuck in her teeth. She spat it out onto the table and said to our stepmother, "Mom, what kind of porridge did you cook today? Why is there something like this in it?" The stepmother stood up, walked over, picked up the black thing from the table, and said, "This thing is dog food, or is it rat droppings?" This matched perfectly with the foot odor I was directing at my sister's face from where I sat at the table. When my sister heard the words dog food, she immediately threw up, and stomach acid spilled onto the floor. The stepmother picked up the spoon and stirred my sister's bowl. The dog food that had been hidden at the bottom of the porridge all floated to the surface. The stepmother shouted, "How did dog food get into this porridge?" I silently raised my hand to indicate and explain. "You see, since our housekeeper ran away, I was worried that the food stepmom cooked wouldn't taste good and wouldn't suit my sister's taste. So I added a spoonful of dog food to her bowl. It's my favorite flavor." I took my feet off the table, stood up, grabbed my sister's spoon, scooped up another spoonful of dog food, and tried to stuff it in her mouth. "Sister, try some more, really, it's so delicious. I used to save it for special occasions. I'm worried about you going hungry now, so I'm giving you the best food." Stepmom slapped the spoon out of my hand onto the floor and glared at me saying, "You did this on purpose." I played dumb and said, On purpose? What do you mean? Isn't dog food delicious? After all, that's what you've been feeding me since I was little, stepmom. Dog food has vegetables, meat shreds, and balanced nutrition. It can help sister grow tall and strong. I stood up and made a gesture like a growing sapling, as if I was dancing. Enough. There was a bang. Dad slammed his chopsticks and bowl onto the table. This action wasn't directed at me. In my memory, it was the first time Dad pointed at my stepmother and sister, saying, "Xiao Gang meant well." How could you treat his kindness like this? Seeing Dad so angry, my stepmother and sister were left speechless. They had been forcing me to eat things I didn't like earlier. So, what's wrong with me making my sister eat dog food now? But Dad still managed to control his temper and said to me patiently, "Xiao Gang, from now on, let's not have any dog food in our house, okay? Look at all the delicious food on the table. Let's only eat good food from now on." I nodded obediently and said, "Okay, let's eat then." I secretly sighed with regret, knowing I couldn't feed dog food to my sister and stepmother anymore. It seems from now on, this dog food will only be for the nanny to eat. I threw a piece of lean meat from the table to the dog that had been waiting by my feet. After eating it, the dog barked happily. My stepmother still wouldn't give up. I imagine every night after the lights go out, this woman must have said plenty of bad things about me to my father. Father finally agreed and, as my stepmother suggested, took me to the hospital for another psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist said to my father, "The mental hospital where you sent him before is an authority in our city, and we absolutely recognize the evaluation report they issued. Moreover, we've also done several psychological consultations with the patient, and he indeed has mental health issues." My stepmother hadn't expected that her previous attempt to get me admitted would now backfire. The mental illness diagnosis had become my protective umbrella for feigning illness. "Doctor, there must be some mistake. He couldn't possibly be ill. He must be faking it." The woman lost her patience. Dad roared at her. "Enough." Then he looked at me, hugged me, and said, "Xiao Gang, you've suffered all these years. Come home with Dad." I saw my stepmother grinding her teeth, mouthing to me, "Just you wait." After returning home, late at night, I saw my sister dragging a small suitcase alone, walking towards the mountain behind the villa district. I quietly followed her. While following, I carefully helped her erase the traces left by the rolling wheels on the ground. She looked around and came to a hidden small slope. Turning on the flashlight, my sister took out a shovel from her chest and started digging. I quietly crouched in the bushes not far behind her, rubbing my hands together while watching her silhouette. She worked very hard, occasionally wiping the sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. After working continuously for about 2 hours, she threw the shovel aside, opened the suitcase, and took out a dog from inside. Yes, that was my dog. I saw her in the middle of the night when she drugged my dog, put it in the suitcase, and took it to the back mountain. She threw the dog into the pit and, with a victorious posture, began laughing maniacally like her mother. "Want to fight with me? First I'll bury your dog, and then you're next. Dare to feed me dog food? This is what happens when you offend me. Hee hee." I rushed over. For the next 3 days, my sister disappeared from home. Dad and stepmom were frantic with worry. They even called the police. After the police arrived, they investigated the surrounding area. The wool tracks that I had carefully cleaned up were still found by them. They followed the tracks all the way to the back mountain. They found my sister, who was buried in the soil with only half of her head exposed. My sister appeared dazed, showing no reaction when seeing Dad and
Stepmom.
I carried a bucket of water, following behind the police officer, and approached my sister. "One little sister isn't enough for our family. I'll plant my sister in the soil, and next year another one will grow. I want more sisters. Grow up quickly, sister." When my sister saw my nearly manic look, she suddenly burst into tears with a loud wail. Tears blurred my stepmother's angry face. She dug away the soil around my sister with both hands, crying out, "Ting Ting, you've suffered so much these past few days. How did you survive being buried here?" She saw the dog food nearby and already knew the answer. My stepmother suddenly ran over, trying to grab my neck as she said, "You crazy psycho. You must be the one who buried Ting Ting here. There's no way I would let her catch me." I stepped back a few meters away from her, patting my behind as I said, "Come catch me. If you catch me, I'll plant you in the ground too." The police asked my father what exactly was going on. Father replied, saying I was mentally ill and had just been released from the hospital. My stepmother wailed at my father. "Look at what your precious son has done. He buried Ting Ting in the ground. If you don't send this guy back to the mental hospital, I'm divorcing you. I'll take my daughter, and you'll never see her again." Father was caught in a dilemma. I stopped in my tracks and said, It was my sister. I saw it with my own eyes. She ran to the back mountain and buried herself in the ground. Everyone stared at me in astonishment. I knew they were questioning how much they could trust the words of someone deemed mentally ill. I took out the DVD I had been carrying and handed it to the police, saying, "Don't believe me? Watch this." The content in that DVD was edited by me, of course, from when my sister left home, dragging her suitcase to the back mountain, then digging the hole. I recorded the whole process. With this evidence, my words were corroborated. The police, holding the DVD, asked my sister what she was doing at the back mountain with her suitcase. My sister could only cry and naturally wouldn't tell the truth. If she confesses the truth that she went to the back mountain to bury my dog as revenge, then her image as daddy's good girl would completely crumble. She wouldn't be that stupid. My stepmother held up the DVD and questioned me. "When you knew your sister went to the back mountain and you even recorded it with your camera, why didn't you stop her? And why didn't you say a word when we spent so many days looking for your sister, even though you knew everything?" I shook my head, trying hard to think. That night as I was taking photos, I got sleepy. I wanted to go to bed, so I went home. Also, I've forgotten about this matter these past few days. The reason for mental illness was just that simple and brutal. Dad said, "All right, now that everyone's fine, let's all go home." Later, my sister became depressed. I planted her in the soil and fed her dog food for 3 days, which indirectly cured her picky eating habits. Now, forget about provoking me. She even hides when she sees me. I've noticed my stepmother's looks at me have become increasingly suspicious. Clearly, she knows that her dramatic acts no longer work on me. Because of the mental illness incident, Dad has become more patient with me than with her. Later, when I smeared feces in her face mask, she couldn't take it anymore. Without going through Dad, she called the mental hospital directly, wanting to have me taken back. My father was sitting at home, still unaware of this situation. At this moment, the doorbell rang. The stepmother eagerly rushed to open the door. When the villa door opened, there was a man and a woman outside who immediately knelt down before the stepmother. Dad heard the commotion and put down his newspaper to walk over. As soon as that man saw my father, he kowtowed and said, "Mr. Zhou, we were wrong. It wasn't right for my mother to take money from Mrs. Zhou." Dad recognized these two people. One was the housekeeper's son, and the other should be his daughter-in-law. He frowned and asked, "What money? What exactly happened?" The housekeeper's son pressed his palms together pleadingly and said, "I know my mother was very wicked in the past. She took money from Mrs. Zhou to abuse Xiao Gang many times. We only found out later that Xiao Gang had been admitted to a mental hospital. We feel very guilty about this. But now my mother has gone missing, and I'm begging you to help me find her." Dad was shocked to hear this news. He wasn't shocked about the housekeeper going missing. Rather, he was shocked to learn that everything I had said about my stepmother abusing me was true. Dad clutched his chest, feeling like he couldn't catch his breath. His heart had never been in good condition. This was also why my stepmother had been so desperately trying to fight me for the family inheritance these past few years. The stepmother still tried to defend herself, saying, "Old Zhou, don't listen to him. He's lying to you. How could I possibly mistreat Xiaogang?" At this moment, an ambulance suddenly stopped at the entrance outside the villa. Several male nurses in white coats jumped down from the vehicle, holding bandages and a stretcher. When the stepmother saw them, it was as if she had seen her savior. The male nurses shouted, "Where's the patient? Where's the patient?" I appeared at the doorway. The stepmother pointed at me and said to the male nurses, "It's him. Grab him and send him to the mental hospital." The stepmother couldn't hide the excitement in her eyes, looking at me with a victor's expression. The male nurses put down the stretcher and came to stand firmly in front of me. The scene she had imagined, of them binding me and taking me away in the vehicle, didn't happen. Those 3 male nurses suddenly saluted me and said in unison, "Good evening, Director." I waved at them and nodded, saying, "So, it's your turn to be on duty this week." These 3 weren't really male nurses at the mental hospital. They were genuine mental patients. They were my fellow patients in the hospital. Back then in the hospital, if you took yourself too seriously as a normal person, you wouldn't survive. I got along well in the psychiatric hospital. Privately, other patients called me the hospital director. I knew that sometimes these psychiatric patients would secretly wear doctors' and nurses' clothes, pretending to catch other mental patients. This was a game I often played with them before. I pointed at my stepmother and said, "This person here is the patient you should take away today." The 3 mentally disturbed individuals turned to look at their stepmother, approaching her step by step. The stepmother was so frightened that she kept backing away. She retreated to the entrance of the basement. A hand reached out from the darkness of the basement doorway. To my surprise, despite being fed psychiatric medication and dog food for so many days, the nanny somehow had the strength to break free from the restraint chair and crawl out of the basement. My stepmother fell to the ground in shock. The nanny, with her emaciated and distorted face, showed a painful expression and said to my stepmother, "Madam, I won't dare anymore. I won't dare to abuse little gang anymore." 3 psychiatric staff approached and pulled my stepmother into the ambulance, despite her resistance. My stepmother was committed to the psychiatric hospital. Later I heard that my stepmother truly went insane in the psychiatric hospital. I told my father everything I knew. My sister was actually the child of my stepmother and her lover. Father had someone take my sister to the hospital for a DNA test. The results proved what I had said. Father and I also did a DNA test. The results showed he was 100% my biological father without doubt. My sister was never able to contact her biological father, and